Well, thank you again for joining us in our series on God's amazing creation. And this is part 2 on, we're going to cover in this lesson, the role of microbes in God's creation. And so we're going to begin by, let me just introduce these lessons and I'll turn it over to Steve. And I'm Tino Unlab and I'm working with Steve Wilshire. And so far we have covered 4 lessons already on God's amazing creation. Lesson number 1 was the Bible theme. Lesson number 2, God created the heavens, followed by God created the earth and man. And then last week, God created the microbes. We call it the MICROCOSMO, part 1. And so today, we are going to look at the role that microbes play in God's creation. And so we will begin with Steve.
The Genesis account shows that there were 6 days of active creation and then rest on the 7th day. And it progressed from the creation of light to the separation of waters and the creation of the sky. And then the seas were defined and dry land appeared or was created, and the plant life in day 3 was, the world was populated with lush plants. And then day 4, we go back to the heavens, the sun and the moon and the stars and the expanse of galaxies, etc., were created. But then day 5 and day 6 is again focusing on the earth. You have all of the creatures, the fish, the water creatures, as well as the flying creatures, the birds, created on day 5, and then in day 6, land animals and man. And the focus that we're giving this afternoon to this second section on microbes is all of the unseen creatures that in a symbiotic way work with one another and work with the creatures that can be seen in order to sustain life. Go ahead and progress to the next slide, Tino.
Okay.
And so we're going to be looking at these interrelationships or these symbiotic relationships, and the power and the complexity of these microbes. I remember as a young man, or really a child, being taught that that the simple celled organisms just evolved over time, and they were very simple, and their function was very simple, and there was complexity and order and design was just not there. And as we have learned more and more in the last 50 or 60 years, we're finding that that line of reasoning, that type of teaching, is untrue. And so, Tino, pick up from that point and let's look at microbes.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. And this is where we ended last week, and that is we looked at the 5 groups of the microbes. What are the groups that make up the microcosmos? And today, for the sake of our lesson, we're going to add 2 more groups. And so we have viruses, bacteria, archaea, protists, fungi, and then we're adding today plants and animals. Now, as Steve pointed out, sometimes we talk about simplicity, but there's no such thing when we come to God's creation. They are very elaborate and very intricate systems, and you're going to see today from our study. And so what we want to emphasize today is the following: that every one of these living organisms is made up of one cell, such as bacteria and archaea, or one cell and many, many cells, such as protists and fungi, or many, many, many cells, such as plants and animals. Now, each one of those cells contains thousands of processes that must be taking place, they must be carried out in order for that microorganism to survive. Now, the processes that must be carried out within that cell, within each individual cell, needs a fuel that is provided by the sun. And so, but we have an issue with that. And that is that the power that the processes within each cell that needs to progress for the organism to survive comes from the sun. But none of the living organisms can use that directly from the sun. And so the function of the green plants and that are on land and the ones that are in the water and some green microorganisms, here's what they do. They take that power or that energy from the sun and they make it into a usable form where all the living things can then access that energy from the sun. As it is, they cannot use it for the critical processes that must take place within the cell for the organism to survive. So how is the energy converted to a usable form that organisms can use? Well, as you see on the left, we have a diagram where a green plant will take sunlight and it will take carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere and it will take water from the soil and will combine them together in a process called photosynthesis. And then it's going to generate a sugar molecule called glucose, a specific sugar molecule, glucose. And this is the sugar molecule that is a package for the energy from the sun that is needed for the processes within the cell to be carried out. In addition to that sugar molecule, you also have oxygen generated. So on the right, you can see the reaction. You have carbon dioxide combined with water and sunlight from the sun through a process called photosynthesis, and it generates glucose and it generates oxygen. The glucose is the sugar that is necessary for every living organism to break it down and extract the energy that it needs to survive. And so the relationship scientifically is through a process called the carbon cycle. And I don't want this to be too complex, but I'll just simplify it this way. You have the plant on the left. It takes the sunlight, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then water from the soil, and through process of photosynthesis, it generates sugar or glucose. Now, that glucose can be accessed by animals when they eat the plant, or it can be accessed by humans when we eat the plants and we eat the animals. That's how we get access to it, okay? Now, animals or any organism that has access to that sugar can break it down and extract the energy. And in the process of breaking it down to extracting the energy, we give off carbon dioxide, which is necessary to go back to the Earth's atmosphere and wait for the next cycle. And so you can see the plant makes the sugar, animals and man and other microorganisms get access to it, and they extract the energy and carbon dioxide is given off into the atmosphere. Now, when the plant dies and the animal dies, the microbes, microorganisms that we have covered already, you have the bacteria, you have the archaea, you have the protists, you have the fungi, and even viruses. They come in and they are the recyclers. They are the decomposers. Now, without them, the world is going to be unlivable, because it's going to be piles and piles of garbage in the world if they don't ever recycle. So these microbes, the microorganisms, they will recycle, and when they have access to that sugar, they break it down for energy that they need, and they too will give off the carbon dioxide. Now, in a case where there is incomplete decomposition of plant matter and animal matter, you have the formation of fossils and fossil fuels, which can be harvested, and we burn it up in our cars. And guess what? Our cars will kick out carbon dioxide, and we keep adding to the Earth's atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. Now, I would like to show you the process that living things use to extract the energy from that sugar molecules. This is just the first part. You can see that this is a very complex process right here. You take glucose, and you, in the process of breaking it down, you are forming energy molecules called ATP. That is the power molecule that the reaction in the cell need to be carried out, right? So here in the higher forms of cell or life, animals and plants and so forth, you take that molecule that you have generated through the first process, and you break it down further to extract more energy, and you give up more carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere. So you can see how complex it is, right? In a microorganism, this is taken and is converted to either lactic acid or ethanol. But the point is this, that sugar molecule is taken and it is broken down by each living cell in order for the energy to be extracted. And so when we talk about simplicity, there's no such thing as simplicity. When we look at God's creation, it is so complex and intricate that when you stand back and you look at it and say, what a powerful design. So in a nutshell, here's what we have. Here's the relationship, right? And here's how all the living organisms on God's earth, in God's creation, here's how they play, or they are related, and they function together in a way that they support the living of each one. So you have the plants that takes carbon dioxide and sunlight and water, and it makes the sugar molecules. It packages the power from the sun in the sugar molecule. Sugar molecule is taken by living organisms, right? And it is broken down to generate energy molecule. And this energy is used for all the thousands of processes within each cell of the microorganism to promote survival of that microorganism. And in the process of extracting that energy, you're giving off carbon dioxide, which again goes back up to the Earth's atmosphere. When the living organisms die, the decomposers, these are the microbes that we have discussed already. They come in and they recycle that tissue, either from the animal or from the plants, and they decompose that. They get access to the energy molecules, and they too break down the energy molecule because they need it for survival. And in the process of breaking it down so that they can extract the energy molecule, they too give off the carbon dioxide. And that's what promotes survival. So plants or the green microorganisms are very important because that's the starting point for making this packaging molecule for the energy that is necessary for all living organisms to survive. And so I would like to take us all the way back to the basis of our study of God's creation. And so the question is, when you look at the microbes, when you look at this process and the interrelationship between microorganisms and the living organism, plants and animals, how is that glorifying God? Well, let me define glory again. God created all this for his glory. Glory is the public display of godly attributes. So when I see an intricate process like this, when I see the complexity of the process that extracts energy from one sugar molecule, and that's just one of the many thousands of processes that take place within the cell, I think of two things: the power of the Creator, the wisdom of the Creator. How about if we add the loving care of the Creator? In that sense, seeing all this, the scientific basis of how living things survive, God is glorified through his creation. Steve, you have anything to add to it before we close?
I just believe that it's beautiful to look at how that God made the plant world. It appears to be independent of man and the animals, but it's not independent. The relationships, the interrelationships are profound because it's the basis for the life of those land animals and the lives of men.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, and then you've got all of the microbes that are both in our cells and in the plants and other animals, and how all of that interrelates. It does glorify God.
Mm-hmm.
It does speak to his glory and his design.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, amen to that. And thank you. And that concludes lesson number 5. And we hope that you will listen to all of them and follow us for the last 2 lessons that we have to present. Thank you.
Thank you.